Get that garbage off my board, Marcus. You are an embarrassment to this district. Mrs. Vance's voice shattered the air like a dropped plate. The sound didn't just echo, it cut. It sliced right through the humid afternoon air of room 304. Marcus stood there, the chalk crumbling in his grip, turning to white dust that coated his fingertips like the ashes of a burning dream. He stared at the number, 22. To him, it wasn't wrong. It was a sequence. 2 sitting next to 2. String theory logic applied to basic arithmetic. But to them? To the 30 other kids baying for blood? He was a circus act, a mistake. The laughter started in the back row, Kyle, the captain of the football team, throwing his head back in a performative display of mockery. Then it spread, a contagion of ridicule infecting every dusk, every smile, every pair of eyes. They weren't just laughing at Amathero, they were laughing at him, at his silence, at the way he looked at words like they were alien hieroglyphs. Ghost in plain sight, Marcus thought, the mantra repeating in his chest. He wished he could turn invisible. He wished the floor tiles with their geometric perfection would open up and swallow him whole. Mrs. Vance stepped closer, her perfume smelling of stale lavender and judgment. I asked you a simple question, boy. Can you not hear, or are you just as deaf as you are thick? Standards must be maintained in this classroom, and you are dragging the average down to the bedrock. She snatched the eraser. With one violent swipe, she obliterated his answer. The white cloud of chalk dust hung in the air between them, a barrier of particulate failure. Marcus didn't flinch. He couldn't. His feet were lead. His heart was a drum beating a retreat that his body refused to follow. He was the 0 in their equation. But they didn't know that 0 is the most powerful number of all.
Watch where you're going, dummy. A shoulder checked him hard, spinning him toward the lockers. Marcus absorbed the impact. He didn't fight back. He didn't yell. In the ecosystem of North Central High, he was prey. Or so they thought. The hallway was a sensory nightmare. Squeaking rubber soles, slamming metal doors, the cacophony of teenage gossip that sounded like buzzing hornets. He walked with his head down, counting the tiles. 1, 2, 3, 5, 8. Fibonacci sequence. It calmed him. It was order in a world of chaos. They saw a kid who couldn't read a paragraph out loud without stuttering. They saw a hoodie drawn tight to hide a face that refused to smile. But inside that hood, inside that mind, galaxies were colliding. Numbers were dancing a waltz that Mrs. Vance couldn't even comprehend. Institutional bias is a heavy coat to wear, especially when it's tailored for you before you even step foot in the building. They looked at him and saw a statistic, a dropout in the making, a future cautionary tale. But numbers don't lie, son. People do. People lie with their eyes, with their assumptions, with their soft bigotry of low expectations. Marcus wasn't slow. He was buffering. He was processing data at a rate that would make their heads spin, but the output port was broken. The words on the page swam like oil on water, refusing to sit still. Dyslexia wasn't a lack of intelligence. It was a different operating system, and nobody here had the manual. He reached his locker, 404. Error not found. How fitting. He dialed the combination, right 32, left 16, right 8. Powers of 2. He clicked it open, and for a split second he stared at the hidden notebook tucked behind his gym clothes, the only evidence of the truth.
The house was quiet, a stark contrast to the war zone of the school corridor. Here, in the sanctuary of 4 peeling walls, the mask came off. Marcus wasn't the stuttering fool here. He was the conductor of a silent symphony. He flipped open the notebook, the one Mrs. Vance would assume was full of doodles or rap lyrics. Instead, it was filled with the beautiful language of the universe. Differential calculus, quadratic equations solved not by rote memorization, but by intuition. He looked at the problem he had copied from the advanced placement textbook he'd found in the library trash, a problem intended for seniors. He solved it in 3 lines. The pencil moved as an extension of his mind, fluid and sharp. There was no hesitation, no 2 + 2 = 22 confusion. Here, the numbers spoke to him. They whispered their secrets. He saw the arc of the parabola before he drew it. He felt the weight of the variable x. Why couldn't he show them this? Why did the letters betray him when the numbers loved him so much? It was the tragedy of the ghost in plain sight.
to be seen yet unknown, to be looked at yet never observed. He remembered the laughter from earlier. It burned in his gut like a swallowed coal. They thought he was nothing, a vacuum. But a vacuum is not empty. It is a space waiting to be filled with energy. He wrote the final solution, underlining it twice with aggressive precision. The graphite snapped. He didn't care. He was building a weapon, not of violence, but of undeniable truth. Someday the dam would break. Someday the world would have to reckon with the mind of Marcus King.
Another disaster, Marcus. Mrs. Vance didn't just hand back papers, she delivered verdicts. She slapped the test on his desk with the finality of a judge's gavel. The red F wasn't just a grade, it was a scarlet letter. It was a brand. "I honestly don't know why you bother showing up," she muttered, loud enough for the surrounding cluster of desks to hear. "This is a place of learning, not a daycare for the intellectually stagnant." The insult hung in the air, toxic and heavy. Sarah, the girl with the perfect ponytail and the cruel eyes, peeked over. Her lips curled into a smirk that was sharper than a knife. She whispered to her friend, "My dog could score higher than that, and he chases his own tail." They laughed. A soft, rustling laughter that sounded like dry leaves skittering on pavement. Marcus felt the anger coil in his stomach, a tight, hot spring. He wanted to scream. He wanted to grab the chalk and fill the board with equations that would make Mrs. Vance's brain short-circuit. He wanted to show them the beauty of the chaos theory he had been reading about. But he stayed silent. Silence was his shield. If he spoke, he stuttered. If he read, he stumbled. So he remained the statue, the punching bag. Standards must be maintained, she had said. But whose standards? The standards of a system designed to filter him out? The standards of a curriculum that measured fish by their ability to climb trees? He stared at the red F. It looked like a broken ladder. He folded the paper, hiding the shame. But the feeling remained. It soaked into his skin.
Oops, my bad, Einstein. The sarcasm dripped from the voice of the varsity linebacker. The book hit the linoleum with a heavy thud. It skidded across the dirty floor, stopping near a trash can. It lay open, exposing diagrams of structural load-bearing dynamics, pages full of sines, cosines, and tangents. The bullies didn't look down. They didn't see the complexity. They only saw the target. Marcus watched them walk away, high-fiving, reveling in their petty dominance. He stood up slowly. His joints felt stiff, burdened by the weight of constant restraint. He walked over to the book. He picked it up with the tenderness one might show a wounded bird. He wiped a smear of ketchup off a diagram of a suspension bridge. These pages were his friends. These authors, dead and gone, understood him better than the living, breathing people in this room. He looked around the cafeteria. Hundreds of kids, noise, movement. All of it superficial, all of it fleeting. He was alone in a crowd of thousands, a singular point in a chaotic graph. He sat back down, smoothing the crumpled page. They could kick the book, but they couldn't kick the knowledge out of his head. They could mock the reader, but they couldn't decipher the text. He was playing a long game, a game of attrition. Let them laugh now. Let them enjoy their moment in the sun, because the sun sets, and when the darkness comes, the stars come out. And Marcus knew exactly how to navigate by the stars.
Indictment. The word stuck in his throat like a jagged stone. "It's indictment, Marcus. For heaven's sake, spit it out." The English teacher rubbed his temples, a gesture of exaggerated exhaustion. The class let out a collective sigh of impatience. Every second Marcus struggled was a second of their lives wasted. That's what they thought. But while his mouth failed him, his mind was racing. He wasn't just trying to read, he was analyzing the font kerning, the spacing, the way the letters flipped and rotated in his visual cortex. He was calculating the probability of the teacher snapping within the next 10 seconds, 98.5%. He was counting the rhythmic tapping of the girl's pen 3 rows over. He was hyper-aware, too aware. The world was too loud, too bright, too much. His stupidity was a defense mechanism against sensory overload. If he shut down, if he played the fool, they left him alone sooner. But the humiliation lingered. It accumulated like silt in a riverbed, rising higher and higher. He saw the pity in the eyes of the few kind students, which was worse than the hatred. Pity meant they accepted his inferiority. Hatred at least implied he was a threat. He preferred the hatred. He preferred the scorn of Mrs. Vance to the soft, condescending smile of the guidance counselor, who suggested vocational alternatives. They wanted him to work with his hands because they thought his mind was broken. They didn't know his hands were merely the servants of a master architect hiding in the shadows of his own brain. Ghost in plain sight. Always watching. Always recording.
This is not just a test, Principal Harris bellowed into the microphone, the feedback screeching. This is about the honor of North Central. We need our best and brightest to step forward for the State Math Olympiad. Best and brightest. The words floated over the assembly like golden balloons, out of reach for someone like Marcus. The smart kids preened. They straightened their postures. They were the chosen ones, the anointed intellects of the system. Sarah looked around, her eyes gleaming with the certainty of her selection. She was the valedictorian apparent, the queen bee of the honor roll. Marcus stood in the shadows of the bleachers. He listened to the criteria: advanced algebra, trigonometry, calculus, theoretical problem solving. This wasn't reading. This wasn't reciting poetry. This was pure logic. This was his language. A spark ignited in his chest, a dangerous, volatile spark. Could he? Dare he? To step into the arena was to invite destruction. If he failed, the ridicule would be eternal. But if he didn't try, the silence would kill him. He looked at the pamphlet in the principal's hand. It was a ticket, a passport to a land where 2 + 2 never equaled 22, unless he were working in base 3 arithmetic, which he knew, but they didn't. The decision formed in his mind like a crystal precipitating from a solution, hard, clear, sharp. He wouldn't just take the test, he would destroy it. Who let this kid in? That would be the first question. Is this a joke? That would be the second. Marcus held the pen like a detonator. Signing his name was an act of rebellion. It was an insurrection against the hierarchy. The library was nearly empty, the dust motes dancing in the slanting shafts of late afternoon light. He could hear the librarian stamping books in the distance, a rhythmic thud, thud, thud. Heartbeat. His hand trembled, not from fear, but from adrenaline. He wrote his name, Marcus. The letters looked strange on the crisp-light paper, sitting below names like Sarah Jenkins and David Miller. His name didn't belong there. It was a glitch in the matrix, a virus introduced to the system. He quickly shoved the paper under a stock of National Geographic. He needed to remain a ghost a little longer, just until the test began, just until the papers were distributed. Once the numbers were in front of him, he would no longer be the boy who couldn't read. He would be the operator, the architect. He slipped out of the library, his heart hammering against his ribs. He had crossed the Rubicon. There was no going back to the safety of the back row now. He had challenged the gods of the school, and they would demand a sacrifice. But Marcus was done bleeding for their amusement. It was time to make them bleed, metaphorically, intellectually. Numbers don't lie, son. But soon, the people would have to face the truth.
You're in the wrong room, Marcus. Mrs. Vance didn't ask, she stated. Her eyes scanned the room, looking for the exit, expecting him to leave. Marcus didn't move. He stared straight ahead, his hands folded on the desk. My name is on the list, he said. His voice was low, steady. No stutter, no fear. Mrs. Vance frowned, checking her clipboard. Her finger traced down the list of honor students until it hit the bottom. Her eyebrow twitched, a microscopic crack in her composure. Well, she sniffed, a sound of pure derision. I suppose they allow anyone to humiliate themselves these days. Don't chew on the pencil, Marcus. We need these back. She dropped the test booklet. It landed squarely in front of him. The seal was unbroken. Inside those pages lay the battlefield. The other students glanced over. Snickers, whispers. Is he lost? Does he think this is remedial math? Sarah turned around, her eyes wide with mock sympathy. Marcus, do you need help finding the special ed room? She whispered. The class stifled a laugh. Marcus didn't engage. He didn't blink. He waited for the clock. Tick, tick, tick. Begin, the principal announced. The sound of pages turning filled the room like the beating of wings. Marcus opened the booklet. Problem 1. A complex polynomial reduction. Child's play. He picked up his pencil. The graphite touched the paper, and the world disappeared.
The scratching of pencils was the only sound, a desperate scratching, the sound of struggle. For them, the test was a mountain. For Marcus, it was a slide. He didn't calculate, he flowed. The equations unraveled before his eyes, revealing their naked truths. He saw the patterns in the chaos. He saw the elegant symmetry of the solutions. Problem 10, solved. Problem 20, solved. He was moving at a velocity they couldn't comprehend. He wasn't just answering, he was correcting the questions in his head, noting where the test makers had been lazy. While Sarah stared at a geometry proof with panic rising in her throat, Marcus was already 3 pages ahead, deriving the formula from first principles. He felt a strange sensation, joy, pure, unadulterated intellectual joy. This was who he was. This was the engine under the hood of the beat-up car. 30 minutes in, an hour allotted. He was done. He checked his work. Perfect, immaculate, a masterpiece of logic. He closed the booklet. The sound was soft, but in the tense silence, it sounded like a gunshot. He stood up. The chair scraped against the floor. Every head snapped up. Mrs. Vance looked at her watch, then at him. "Giving up already, Marcus?" she asked, her voice dripping with vindication. "Just leave it on the desk and go." Marcus walked to the front. He placed the booklet on her pile. "I'm finished," he said. The silence that followed was heavy, thick, suffocating. He turned and walked out, leaving a room full of open mouths and furrowed brows. He had just dropped a bomb, and he was walking away before the explosion.
Impossible. The word escaped Mrs. Vance's lips as a whisper of denial. The red pen hovered, ready to strike, ready to bleed ink all over Marcus's failure. But there was no failure to find. She stared at the first page. All correct. The handwriting was jagged, urgent, but the math? The math was divine. "He cheated," she said to the empty room. "He must have cheated." She flipped to the back, the final problem, the one she knew Sarah had missed, the one she herself had struggled to solve when reviewing the answer key. Marcus had solved it, and he hadn't used the standard method. He had used a shortcut derived from advanced number theory, a method she hadn't taught, a method she barely recognized. Her hands started to shake. The coffee in her cup rippled. This wasn't just a passing grade. This was a perfect score, 100%, in a test where the class average was a 65. The cognitive dissonance crashed into her mind like a freight train. The boy who couldn't match 2 plus 2 was a prodigy? No, it couldn't be. It broke her worldview. It shattered the hierarchy she had carefully maintained. If he was a genius, then she was the fool, and Mrs. Vance did not accept being the fool. Her shock turned to suspicion. Suspicion turned to anger. "You think you can play me," she hissed at the paper. "You think you can make a mockery of my classroom with this fraud?" She grabbed the phone. She dialed the principal's home number. "We have a situation," she said, her voice trembling with malice, a severe breach of academic integrity.
"Step forward, Marcus." The principal's voice was grave. Mrs. Vance stood beside him, arms crossed, a triumphant smirk plastered on her face. She held the test paper like a weapon. "We need to talk about your performance yesterday," the principal continued. "Mrs. Vance tells me there are some irregularities." The class giggled. They knew what was coming. The expulsion, the public shaming. "You scored a perfect 100%, the principal said. The class gasped. The giggles died instantly, replaced by shock, then disbelief. "However," the principal added, his tone hardening, "Mrs. Vance believes, and I agree, that this is statistically impossible given your history. You obviously obtained the answer key, or used a phone, or copied. Accusations flew like arrows. Cheater, liar, fraud." Mrs. Vance stepped in. "Admit it, Marcus. Who gave you the answers? Was it the janitor? Did you break into my desk?" Marcus looked at them. He looked at the sea of faces waiting for his execution. He looked at the teacher who despised him. He felt a calm settle over him, the calm of the eye of the storm. "I didn't cheat," he said, clear, resonant. "Don't lie to me,"
Mrs. Vance slammed her hand on the desk. You can't even read the textbook. You expect us to believe you solved non-linear equations? I can't read well, Marcus said, but I can count, and I can solve. Prove it, she snapped. Right now, in front of everyone. This was the trap, the public execution. She wanted him to fail, live on stage.
Here is your chance, genius, Mrs. Vance sneered. The problem on the board was a beast, a multivariable calculus problem that belonged in a second-year university course. It was designed to break him. It was designed to expose him. Solve for X, she commanded, and show your work, every single step. The class held its breath. This was it, the end of the road. Sarah whispered, "He's dead." Marcus took the chalk. It felt cool in his hand. He looked at the board. He didn't see a monster. He saw a puzzle. He saw the beautiful interplay of rates of change. He saw the answer before he even touched the board. He closed his eyes for a second, blocking out the haters, the doubters, the system. He took a breath, and then he began. The chalk hit the slate with a rhythmic tat-tat-tat. He didn't hesitate. He didn't pause to think. His hand moved like it was possessed by the spirit of Newton. Line after line of white logic appeared on the black abyss. He simplified the integral. He factored the polynomial. He derived the variable. The speed was blinding. Mrs. Vance's smirk faltered. Her eyes widened. She stepped closer, squinting. She checked the book. She looked back at the board. He was right. He was actually doing it. The silence in the room changed. It wasn't the silence of anticipation anymore. It was the silence of awe, the silence of witnessing a miracle.
The sound of the chalk breaking echoed like a gavel strike. Marcus stood up. He dusted his hands. He turned to face the room. The board behind him was covered in dense, complex, perfect mathematics, a tapestry of intellect woven in white dust. The final answer, 0, stared out at them, the symbol of nothing representing everything. Mrs. Vance was pale. She looked like she had seen a ghost, the ghost in plain sight. She looked at the book. The answer key matched, exactly. But Marcus's method? It was more elegant than the book. It was shorter, cleaner. Is that correct? The principal asked, his voice weak. Mrs. Vance couldn't speak. She just nodded. A small, jerky motion. The room exploded, not with laughter this time, but with whispers. Did you see that? He's a machine. He's a genius. The paradigm had shifted. The axis of their world had tilted. The boy they mocked, the boy they kicked, the boy they dismissed had just outsmarted the teacher. Marcus looked at Sarah. She couldn't meet his eyes. She looked down at her desk, ashamed. He looked at the boys who had kicked his book. They looked terrified. Intelligence is a power, and Marcus had just revealed he was holding a nuclear weapon. He didn't smile. He didn't gloat. He just stood there, the master of his domain. Can I go back to my seat now? He asked. Or do you have another problem for the dummy to solve?
I apologize, Marcus, the principal stammered, suddenly seeing a state trophy instead of a dropout. We had no idea. Clearly there has been a misunderstanding regarding your potential. He reached out a hand. Marcus took it, his grip firm, his eyes cold. He didn't need their apologies. Apologies were for accidents. This was systematic. This was deliberate. He looked at Mrs. Vance. She was broken. Her authority, built on the illusion of superior intellect, had crumbled. She couldn't even look at him. She was the one who needed to learn now. Marcus walked back to his desk. The walk was different this time. No one bumped him. No one jeered. They pulled their legs in. They shifted their chairs. It was a path of respect. Fear-based respect, perhaps, but respect nonetheless. He sat down. He didn't puff out his chest. He didn't brag. He just pulled his hood up. He went back into the shadows. But the shadows were different now. They weren't a hiding place. They were a throne. He had proven his point. He didn't need their validation. He knew who he was. He was the variable they forgot to account for, the outlier that skewed the data. He looked at the chalkboard, at his masterpiece. It was already being erased by the next teacher, but it was etched into their minds forever. Standards had been maintained all right. His standards. They say the quiet ones are the dangerous ones, Marcus thought as he pushed open the heavy double doors. The fresh air hit his face, tasting of freedom and ozone. They're right, because while you're talking, we're listening. While you're laughing, we're learning. And while you're sleeping, we're working. He walked down the concrete steps, the school looming behind him like a conquered fortress. He wasn't just a student anymore. He was a legend. The boy who made the math teacher cry. The boy who turned a 0 into a hero. But the fight wasn't over. There were more classrooms, more doubts, more systems designed to keep him down. But he had the code now. He had the key. He adjusted his backpack, feeling the weight of the hidden books, his true companions. He looked at the horizon. The future was an unsolved equation, and he couldn't wait to crack it. Never let them define you by what you can't do. Show them what you can do. Make them watch. Make them understand. Because in a world full of noise, the silence is where the genius grows. Subscribe to Silent Genius Stories, because justice isn't given, it's taken.